Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Thank you for joining me for the podcast where our personal stories remind us how much we can learn from each other. My guest today is Kristen Swan, and she helps people make sense of their experiences through curiosity, structure, and disciplined reflection, especially during moments of transition. Our conversation will focus less on quick fixes and more on how people actually come to understand themselves over time. Now, Kristen, thank you for joining me today.
Well, thank you so much, Val. It's just a pleasure to be here.
Nice to have you here. Happy New Year. It's January 2026. We record this. So, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you too. I'm ready for a new year.
Yes, me too. So, since we're still in the first month of the year, people are still probably faithful to their New Year's resolutions at this point, and who knows what all they've got planned for the year. But is there one word you hear all the time from your work that sort of secretly makes you skeptical of people who are training in personal growth spaces?
Yes, I would say the thing that maybe it's not so much the a word specifically. It is more of a kind of an attitude or perception of wanting to become better, right? There's this feeling that gets shared, and I think we can all really kind of fall into line with this type of thinking of the need to fix ourselves. Yeah.
All right. So, can you share a story of how your early life experiences, particularly frequent transitions, shaped your approach to curiosity and human connection?
Yeah. So as you mentioned or alluded to, I moved a lot growing up. I think when I sat down and counted one day, I between the ages of 0 and 12, I think it was like 8 or 9 different places that I had
Wow.
lived. And then by extension, needing to change schools in the process of that. So it really it wasn't something that I was particularly fond of in the moment. It definitely didn't. I it made me sad and sometimes angry as a young person, pretty out of control, right? So you start to, I mean, for myself, either I could have chosen, I guess, to stay angry, but that's just not really the person that I am. So you figure out how you're going to manage this. And one of the ways that I was able to do this and kind of welcome each change was really recognize that while there were always things that I was going to miss about the previous home or school, that there was usually kind of some surprises that were waiting at the new space. And so that's where kind of my curiosity had to be. I had to be present enough to see where those little new, kind of moments of magic essentially were that are available, I do believe, in each and every life. But again, just having to be more present. So I think there was that piece of it. And I mean, I'm not saying that I had this language as a child, but I kind of felt my way into it, right? And the other thing I think that was so fortunate for me is to have the consistency of my grandparents as a real, just rock around my upbringing. And the flip side of that is that I was very comfortable talking to adults. I mean, I was an only child and I spent a lot of time with my grandparents and by extension, their friends. So I always was comfortable talking to adults. And especially as I moved homes and schools, but particularly I think as it relates to school, I was able to see the teachers as people, as resources, as people that I could really connect with. I may not have always been as comfortable or adept connecting and making new friends amongst my peers, but I at least could get that little toehold in connecting with the teachers.
So, did you live in different states or just moving from house to house within the same region?
No, just, it's a lot of times when people hear this, they're like, oh, did you grow up with a family in the military or something of that nature? Yeah, no, my parents divorced when I was very young. They split up when I was about 4. And as a result, I lived primarily with my mom. And so we were moving pretty much within the same kind of 3 to 5 city kind of radius. My mom had she kind of had a little bit of a misguided sense that there was this geographic fix out there, right? That you get to the next place and somehow all those things that were bothering you before are going to vanish or improve. And I think that's also maybe part of what I realized at a very young age is I can't remember exactly how the old saying goes, but just, no matter where you go, that, there you are essentially. Right. And so being able to live through that and witness that, I think really gave me a lot of insight to how people kind of navigate the difficult situations in their lives, and where are you able to sit with the discomfort, and where we all, and then the flip side where we have these tendencies to want to escape our difficulties.
And so, what made you move from landscape design into business coaching and eventually into the work you do today as a life and spiritual guide?
Well, when I started landscape design, for starter, I just to clarify, it was, I had a background in fine art. So I definitely, I consider myself to be visually creative. But it was funny because at the time that first started my landscape design business, it wasn't really something I chose. It was something that I had people basically coming to, we had bought a home at that time, very small home. We had a big yard. I had little kids and not a lot of disposable income. And so I started working on the yard, and because it was a great way to keep the kids outside and we could all be busy. And people, I would have people over and they would start to admire the work that I had done, and especially friends who came to see it over time and could witness the transformation that happened. And so people started telling me essentially that I was good at this. So I thought, after a while of accepting people's gifts for my consultations on how to improve their outdoor spaces, I thought, well, I might as well start a business on this. So I launched this business. I have no idea what I'm doing. I mean, really no idea. And one of my first thoughts was that I needed some letters after my name, right? I needed a degree that proved that I could do this thing, which I think is so funny because here I was doing the thing already, right? But I started doing a landscape architecture program and quickly realized I don't want to be a landscape architect. I'm very happy being a landscape designer. I had a lot of clients at this time. I mean, it was actually quite difficult to kind of fit school into my day on top of being a parent, being newly divorced, running this business that I had no idea how to run a business. So I fumbled my way through entrepreneurship as a landscape designer for many years, and eventually got better at it, and went through several different iterations where I had a partner at one time. I was on my own for a while. I tried out all these different ways of doing the business. And when I started my business, I was essentially operating in my own little bubble. I would get clients based on referrals. I became really good friends with the local nursery. I didn't really know other landscape designers or landscape architects. I just, it sounds so amazing to me now when I describe it, but I just kind of was doing my thing. And I ultimately ended up becoming involved in a local trade association. And then I started meeting other designers. And these were people I really admired. I mean, they were doing just such creative and exquisite work and working at much bigger scale than I was. After I just was in such admiration. And then as I got to know these people better, I realized so many of them, their business quite their kind of the way that they were doing the business was probably really an impediment to them being as successful as they could be. So I realized my through line of all the different jobs I've done is I love supporting other people. And particularly, I love supporting other people in kind of their quest for success. And the way that I think about success is I think about it as not this one size fits all word. Part of my business coaching practice was the very first out of the gate with a new client say, I want you to define success for you. What does success look like for you? Because I think it's so important that we all do this, right? You don't have to be a business owner, but we all, and I think that defining what success means to us for our lives is something we probably want to revisit over time, because I think that definition also changes and evolves as you evolve as a person or your life stages change, right? So it I realized I was like, I'm not that tied to this idea of being my identity as a landscape designer. So it was a real easy leap for me to jump into this business coaching and support others in being successful in achieving what they wanted to achieve. Although I will say the very beginning, I was reaching out to certain people that I knew that were within my close circle of designers. And I thought, oh gosh, these folks are going to be so excited to take me up on my offer to, improve their businesses. And yeah, it took a little while to get, they weren't quite looking at things the same way that I was looking at it.
So you've used the term spiritual autobiography. What does
Yeah.
that mean?
Well, for me, the spiritual autobiography, the first time I came across this idea, I had gone through a really wonderful small group facilitation training that was through a local church here in town. And it was just the training itself was such a gift. It was so well done and so thorough and comprehensive. And of course, after you do the training, they ask you to lead a small group, which of course I was so grateful for the gift of this training. I thought, yes, give me a group. And the groups that I led were for people who were interested in, maybe they were new to town, maybe they hadn't been to church for a while, maybe, whatever. They were new to this church. And so it was kind of an introduction. And one of the activities we would do was a spiritual autobiography. And I remember doing it with the group the very first time and I really just this idea of reflecting on your life through this specific lens of spirituality was really memorable for me. It really it opened up my kind of my understanding of a lot of my past in a way that doing an autobiography that is more kind of chronological or, based on maybe your professional journey, or, it opened up just a different way of thinking and reflecting on my life experiences. And so, that was, I don't even know how many years ago that was when I did that first one. And a couple of years ago, I had figured out that I was ready to move on from business coaching, and I had returned to school to get, again, right, I'm seeking, so I'm thinking, oh, let's get some more letters after my name. And so I go to get a master's of education, and because I'm flirting with the idea of maybe I can teach. And I thankfully, in that process of doing the master's program and graduating, I was reminded about how much I love that small group facilitation. It was at a time, so I graduated and I gave myself a little bit of time to figure out what my next thing was. And I've always been very entrepreneurial, and I've also always really known what the next thing is going to be. It quite honestly was a very uncomfortable moment to be not quite sure what the next thing was going to be. I realized that becoming a teacher and joining academia was probably not a good fit for my entrepreneurial spirit, a little bit too structured in certain ways. I so I really kept reminding myself, I know from past experience when I have rushed into things because of my own discomfort around kind of not knowing, right? That it hasn't always had good results for me. I spent a lot of my 20s and 30s rushing from one thing to the next just to fill the void and to avoid the the feeling of not knowing. I kind of in that time where I just kept reminding myself, be patient, the spiritual autobiography kept coming back to me, and I thought, I'm going to create my own curriculum around discovering your spiritual autobiography. And so I have done that and created a workshop and retreat. So for me, the starting point around this exploration really is to recognize spirituality for me is the acknowledgement of something that is bigger than myself.
Okay, you have something that you call spaghetti on the wall journaling,
Yes.
and it encourages non-judgmental observer stance. What is that? And walk us through the process of that, how that works.
So when I was in the midst of my business coaching, and so back in 2017, I was working with all sorts of wonderful people and primarily business owners and founders. So we're working one-on-one and I'm getting to know them very well. And I am recognizing how often people have a lack of awareness around kind of their own patterns, or maybe how they are making different choices and decisions, right? And so I'm working with clients who are saying, gosh, I really don't like this outcome. I don't know how I got there, right? And I kind of know how they got there because I've been listening and observing, and I realized both in that moment of working so closely with people and getting to know them in real, especially if you're a small business owner, there isn't really this deep divide between your personal life and your professional life, right? So I'm getting to know these people intimately. And I thought, I know for myself that in order for me to make adjustments or changes in my life, when I've done that, it had to start with awareness, right? It wasn't that I just was like, oh gosh, I don't like this. I'm going to change it. Right. Or, I mean, the times that I did do something like that where I maybe said I wanted to change and it wasn't based on an awareness or a knowing, then the change probably wasn't the right change or just didn't stick. And so I created Spaghetti on the Wall as a daily practice where you reflect on. I personally, I use it myself, and of course, when I was creating it, I was deeply in need of this, but it's so much easier to see what other people need. So, but thank goodness it got created. So the way I use it is I do it each morning. And so I'm reflecting on the day that has passed, and it starts by asking you kind of your top thoughts so you can kind of get that off of your brain. And then it gives you the prompt to journal, and the instructions really encourage you to journal from the stance, as you mentioned, of being a non-judgmental observer, right? Kind of a witnessing what has your day has been like, or however you're using it. And then from there are prompts for you to, I call them the experience evaluator, right? So then it's asking you kind of to pull those moments of, I call them the big yeses, so pull those moments of joy and engagement and connection from the day and reflect on those and notice those. And because that's such good information, right? And then there's another section that says not so much. And that's for you to notice those moments in your day that you weren't feeling it. And either you felt yourself getting irritated, perhaps you were just shutting down, perhaps you were bored. So it's a place, again, not to make something bad, right? You don't have to, it's not about making ourselves bad or making the thing or the situation bad. It's really just noticing how it landed for you. And I like to recognize that in the not so much area, which I think is in my journal, there's more room for the not so much, only because I think of our tendency to, not want to feel the stuff that doesn't feel that great. And what I'm inviting us all to do, and this includes myself, is to get comfortable with it and to recognize that it doesn't mean that it's forever, right? So you can change your mind. Something that doesn't feel this great this week, it doesn't mean that it's not going to, it's not set in stone, right? But you just observe it for that moment. And then there's another section that invites you to kind of do your out of the box inspiration. And so I find that for myself, once I go through the more structured prompts of documenting the day, evaluating the day, I don't know, then kind of some thoughts start bubbling up that I can grab and put on paper. And so that's the spaghetti on the wall, is to give yourself a place to pause and reflect and notice. And because I think that there is such value in getting to know yourself. And I say this as someone, as I mentioned, who didn't really do that for a long time. And as a result, there were choices that I made that were probably not in my best interest. And then by extension, they affected other people, and whether it was my family or loved ones, friends, so colleagues. I mean, I think that when we get to know ourselves, then we can start to trust ourselves, and by extension, really do less harm, so to speak.
Okay, you've said that people often fear success
Mhm.
more than failure. So, can you explain why that's the case and how someone can work through that type of fear?
Yes, I think that the fear of success is based on the fact that when we are talking about, I mean, there's degrees of success, right? But in a lot of instances, if you were to ask someone, what is the success that you are looking for, right? What is it that you desire? It is probably something that they may not have had before or experienced before. So you're essentially stepping into the unknown. And we like the familiar, right? And so our no one really likes failure. However, it is familiar. And so there is some comfort in that. And that's the simplest difference, I think, between success and failure for so many people is we're talking about the unknown versus kind of that comfortable familiar space. And so as you think about success and work towards it, I think a couple of things that I recommend for, myself and others is you want to have that big goal, right? You can have that big picture of what success means to you, and just start with the first designated step, right? Just start. Don't get too far ahead of yourself, because a lot of times, I was journaling the other day and I was writing about some goals that I have and what would, basically be part of my definition of success. And I realized that there was some tension because there was a sense in as I was journaling that I was worried that I was going to have to work so much harder, right? That it was somehow, if I achieved this success that I was envisioning, that I would miss out on the opportunity, right, to attend family gatherings and things like that. And I had to really remind myself to say, slow down. If when you get to that point that you are that busy or successful, however you want to say, um, you're going to have figured out support along the way, right? So again, it's that toggling between that which we know and that which we haven't yet experienced. And so basically that fear that was creeping in was kind of my old experience of when I grew my landscape business much too quickly without the proper supports. And yes, I was doing it all and it was not sustainable, right? But just because it happened that way that time, it doesn't need to look like that the next time. And plus, I have all that good information right now if I just pay attention to it.
Right. So, how would you describe the relationship between spirituality, if I
Mhm.
could talk here, and professional growth for someone who is skeptical of the term spiritual?
Mm. Yeah, it definitely I was when when I had this great idea to reintroduce the spiritual autobiography to the world in my way. I wasn't necessarily so prepared for how many people would, as I say, would respond, have an allergic reaction to the word spiritual. And so what I like to say is I like to remind people, and in the workshop we do a segment on really unpacking religion and religious beliefs from spiritual beliefs, and really allowing for each person to recognize that for some people that I've experienced in my workshops, they're hand in glove. They're the same thing. For most people, I will say there are differences. And for someone who really is saying, spiritual is is not part of that's not how I think about life. That's not how I experience life. I guess my question would be, when you walk outside, or, I even have a plant on my desk. When you look at nature, for me, there is such evidence again of that thing that is bigger than myself, and that with all the natural sciences, there are still things that we have to learn that we don't necessarily know, right? And so perhaps maybe that's the way that I can expand that invitation, is just to say, are there things that you connect with that you don't necessarily know every element of how it happens?
Okay. Can you share a particular moment you talked about? Basically, you described what people would call imposter syndrome,
Mm.
being afraid of success. Can you share a moment or experience when you finally began to believe that you had confidence in the things that you were doing?
Well, it's an ongoing process. Let's be fair. It is something that there are still moments where I can get, yeah, I can get unsure of myself and kind of fall into that pattern of thinking, gosh, do I really have it? How do I really figured this out? And really the answer is no, I haven't figured it all out. But what I can really ground myself in is that my lived experience and my willingness to ask questions and remain curious and open to others and to new experiences is has value, right? And I don't walk into a space, whether it's this conversation or a workshop or anything I do, thinking I've got it all figured out, right? I guess what I trust in at this moment is that I am genuine in recognizing my own experience, and I just want to share that. And it doesn't I'm not trying to change other people, and I just hope that maybe there's one or two people that what I have to say, it connects with them in this moment, right?
Okay, so you're a guide and coach for other people. Do you have somebody like that for you?
Yeah, it's interesting. I am so fortunate to have a really great support system. So someone asked me recently about mentorship, right? And what is when I first got the question, my immediate reaction was, yeah, mentorship is great, right? I mean, we all want to be kind of looking for mentors, and also if we can offer ourselves as mentors, because I really see kind of this I think that we all have something to teach and we all have something to learn, right? I mean, it's just this wonderful circle of experience and knowledge and sharing. And when I was thinking about growing up, and even beyond kind of the childhood years, because of the way that I was raised, I had such a I had this idea that I was supposed to do everything on my own, and I was supposed to figure everything out on my own. Self-reliance was kind of valued above all else, right? That somehow there was this concept that was I bought into for some reason, of that asking for help was meant that I was a failure. So I am so grateful that despite my dogged determination to be self-reliant, I mentioned that there were teachers, right, that came into my life. And so upon reflection, I can see these moments where real mentors came into my sphere, and I didn't necessarily ask them to be there, yet, what a gift it was for them to be there and support me. So I would say it's not that I have one particular person at this moment in my life, but I do have kind of this wonderful, I feel like, collective of both teachers who have since passed away that I still think about what I learned from them. And really, one of the things I consistently try to do is remain open to new people in my life, because I'm sure I just know that there's so much more for me to learn out there, and I want to be paying attention.
Okay, as we start to wind down the conversation, I just have two more questions for you.
Yeah.
So, for listeners who feel stuck or uncertain about their own next steps, what one question would you invite them to ask themselves this week?
I would say I I would suggest to them, maybe it's not a question, maybe it's more of a noticing of catching yourself doing things right. So what I mean by that is, as little kids, right? We're always worried that we're being caught doing, our hand in the cookie jar, so to speak, right? And there's such an emphasis on this idea of, doing things wrong. And we started the conversation, right, with the new year and all of our resolutions of this idea of fixing ourselves. So I would say catch yourself doing things right. Like, and then what that looks like is, where do you find yourself doing something that almost feels effortless, right? Or maybe there is extreme effort to it, and you just and it feels so good, right? Like you're it's worth it to you, right? To dive into, maybe it's you love, making something, bread, which to me seems very, very hard to do. But I mean, and it's time consuming, but you love that effort. I mean, just be paying attention to these little bits of information about where you're finding joy and engagement. So catching yourself doing things right. I just think that there's so much information to be gleaned from these moments, and we are too easily we can discard these little joys and take them for granted. So just take the moment to recognize them.
Okay, and before we go today, uh, how do they contact you or find out more about you, or the things that you offer or things that you have to support them?
Yeah, for sure. I have a website, kristenswan.com. So that is a great place you can take a look at Spaghetti on the Wall. I have a new journal coming out at the end of the month that I'm really excited about. So that will be up, and it's a great place you can read. I post weekly on a blog there. And then if you're on social media, you can find Kristen Swan on all the various social media platforms. So I'm pretty active out there too.
Okay, and I will include those links in the show notes for this episode.
Thank
So, my
you.
guest today has been author and reflective writing practitioner, Kristen Swan. Kristen, thank you so much for being here. And again, Happy New Year.
Well, Happy New Year to you too, and thank you.
You're welcome. So, if this conversation resonated with you, I encourage you not to rush past it. Take some time, think about it, take one idea, one question, and then write something about yourself and use Kristen's advice about catching yourself doing something good. So that's our advice for the beginning of the year, is a new resolution that you may not have even considered. So you can learn more about Kristen's work, writing, and reflective practices through the links in the show notes. This is Stories from Real Life. Until next time, don't forget to shine your light wherever you go.